What if a gift that seemed too good to be true was exactly that? I woke to the smell of pine and damp earth, a scent I hadn't expected to fill my tiny apartment in the city. A letter sat on my kitchen counter, thick, official-looking, but without a return address. It wasn't unusual to get mail from unknown sources. What was unusual was the weight of the envelope and the handwriting. Curled, deliberate strokes, an almost artistic signature at the bottom, my neighbor's name. Mr. Harrow, the man everyone called generous, odd, harmless, the kind of neighbor who smiled a little too long, asked a little too many questions, yet never crossed the line, until now. I tore open the envelope. Inside, a will, a final wish, and a key. It read simply, "To my neighbor who always kept me company and never judged my ways, I leave my cabin. Take care of it, and it will take care of you." At first I laughed. A cabin in the woods? Mine? Really? It sounded like a dream, an escape, a getaway from the hum of city life, the noise, the deadlines, the constant pressure, a place where I could breathe, write, or just exist. But then a strange feeling crept in, unease, the subtle hesitation that something wasn't quite right, because Mr. Harrow, as generous as he seemed, had always been peculiar. His eyes too sharp, his questions probing, his timing uncanny. I packed a bag with excitement and a little trepidation. The drive out was longer than I expected, through winding roads, dense forests, and mist that clung to the edges of the trees like ghostly fingers. The air grew colder, the silence thicker. And then there it was, a cabin. Small, sturdy, wooden, yet foreboding. The kind of place that looked inviting at first glance, but promised something more. The key fit perfectly. The door opened with a creak, and I stepped inside. The interior was simple, rustic, cozy. A fireplace, a wooden table, a few chairs, and a shelf lined with books. Sunlight streamed in through dusty windows, illuminating the wooden floorboards and the smell of old pine. I felt a thrill, relief, joy, a new beginning, until I noticed the envelope on the table, a second letter, smaller, handwritten. "Welcome. Take care of what you now possess. The cabin will reward and punish. The choice is yours." I laughed nervously. Surely this was eccentricity, a flourish of Mr. Harrow's odd sense of humor. And I was right. Or so I thought.
The first night was serene. The wind whispered through the trees. The moonlight danced across the walls. But something was off. Shadows moved in ways the trees couldn't explain. The cabin seemed alive, breathing, watching. The floorboards groaned beneath steps I hadn't taken. I told myself it was my imagination. City life had worn me thin. Stress had a way of twisting the mind. But then came the noises. A knock, soft at first, then deliberate, heavy. Not at the door, somewhere inside. I explored every room. Nothing. Doors locked, windows shut, no one. And then the phone rang, a local number I didn't recognize. "Did you receive it?" The voice was low, deliberate, not threatening, not exactly, but filled with knowledge I shouldn't have expected anyone to have. "It's yours now, the cabin. You've accepted. That makes you responsible." And just like that, the dream began to sour. The air felt heavier, the shadows darker, the sense of being watched undeniable. I went to sleep, unsure if I was dreaming or awake, if the creaks were the wind or footsteps, if the cabin was just a cabin. Morning brought relief, sunlight again, warm, reassuring. But the unease lingered, a subtle certainty that what Mr. Harrow left me wasn't just property. It was a test, a trap, a warning. By the second day, I started exploring the surrounding woods. Birdsong, rustling leaves, a gentle creek, all normal, idyllic. But there were signs, subtle and deliberate. A worn path leading away from the cabin, marks on trees, numbers carved, dates, names, symbols I didn't understand. Curiosity mixed with dread. I should have turned back. I should have left. But the cabin had a gravity. It drew me in, whispered to me, and I ignored the warning. That night, as I lit the fireplace, a flashlight beam appeared through the window. I froze, heart in my throat. Not my flashlight, not my reflection. Someone outside, watching. And then the police arrived. Red and blue lights flashing through the trees, sirens slicing the night air. Officers emerged, serious, deliberate. "Step outside," one called. "We need to ask you about Mr. Harrow's cabin." My stomach dropped. My dream of peace shattered. "What's going on?" I asked. "Why are you here?" "There's been an incident," they said. "You need to come with us." And in that moment, the cabin's walls seemed to close in. The shadows thickened. The floorboards groaned, as if whispering, "You should have known." What had I inherited? A place of retreat or a trap? The answers would take days to unfold, and by then, the small, generous gift would reveal itself for what it truly was, a portal into a dark past that no one should ever have been invited into.
Have you ever wondered what lies behind the walls of a place that everyone else seems to avoid? The first time I walked into that cabin, it felt like stepping into someone else's story. I'd seen homes before, places abandoned or inherited, but nothing had this weight. This wasn't just wood and stone, it was memory, secrets, and whispers trapped in the grain of the floorboards. After the police left that first night, I couldn't sleep. The moonlight seemed sharper, the shadows more precise. I kept hearing faint scratching, like someone dragging something across the floor above me. I knew I was alone, but also not. By morning, I started investigating. Not with the authorities. No, they had their questions, their files, their red tape. I went into the local library. Old newspapers, property records, town archives. And the cabin story began to unfold. It wasn't built recently, not 10 years ago, not 20. It had been there for decades, 60 years, maybe more. Originally, it belonged to the Harrow family, generations of them, not just wealthy, but influential, local politics, business, and law enforcement. They were the kind of people everyone knew, but no one crossed. Stories said the family was generous, charitable, but there were whispers too, stories that vanished when asked aloud. The first report was an accident, an isolated death in the woods nearby. Official records claimed misfortune, yet townsfolk remembered it differently. A child, a boy, had disappeared, no trace, no evidence. Some claimed they saw him near the cabin that night. Others said he'd been lured away by someone in the family, but all memories were unofficial, oral, and quickly dismissed. I found old photographs tucked in a dusty filing cabinet in the local archive. A small cabin, similar to the one I inherited, surrounded by thick pines. Children playing near it, smiling faces, innocent, happy. Until one photo stood out. A boy standing too close to the edge of the porch, his expression stiff, as if frozen mid-cry. And in the background, a figure, tall, faceless in the shadow, watching. I remember feeling my chest tighten. That's the thing about uncovering the past. It reaches into your body before your mind fully understands it. You feel before you think. You sense before you rationalize. And there were journals, hidden, forgotten, tucked away in the town records, personal accounts, diaries from the Harrow family, letters from friends, cryptic notes from neighbors. One page leapt out at me. The cabin must remain ours, not just ours, but hidden. What happens there cannot escape. No one can know, not yet, The child, the games, it will all remain in shadows until the time is right. Games, child, shadows. The phrases echoed in my mind like the cabin itself was whispering to me. Every step I took into the cabin after that felt different. The floorboards creaked, yes, but now I wondered, were they warning me? The fireplace no longer smelled of pine and warmth. It smelled of ash and something unspoken. I returned to the town hall, diving into old police reports, missing persons, unusual calls, strange accidents, all filtered, redacted, or lost. One report from the 1970s caught my attention. Child missing from vicinity of Harrow cabin. No evidence found. Investigation ongoing. Family cooperation noted. Case unresolved. That line hung in the air. Not unresolved, not ignored, just suspended. It was clear someone had ensured the past stayed buried, and now, decades later, I had stumbled into it. The cabin wasn't just property, it was a witness, a vault of secrets.
I remember walking the perimeter of the cabin that second evening. The sun had set, but the sky still glowed faintly behind the trees. Everything seemed normal, peaceful, almost inviting, until I noticed something on the back porch. Scratch marks on the wooden railing. Fresh. Not old, weathered, but new. I traced them with my finger, and then I noticed footprints in the dirt, small, light. Someone had been here, recently. My phone buzzed. A local number again. Do you see now? It has chosen you. It watches. Be careful. I froze. The hairs on my arms stood up. I knew I wasn't imagining it. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak, every whisper of wind, every shadow seemed alive. I checked the journal entries I had found in the archives, reading them over and over. The child's laughter still echoes. If you hear it, beware. It is not a game. It never was. Do not trust what seems generous. By morning, I knew I had to investigate further. I needed to understand the Harrow's history in a way no one else had dared. The newspapers described the family as philanthropists, the pillars of the community, but the archives told a different story. A family who controlled the town, manipulated the law, silenced witnesses. Even old neighbors were reluctant to speak. One elderly woman muttered as I approached, "Some things are better left unspoken. The cabin is not a gift. Never a gift. Leave it." But I couldn't. Curiosity had me in its grip. And the police? They weren't finished. The first officer I spoke with, a man named Harlan, leaned close and whispered, "Harrow's generosity has a cost. Everyone knows it, but no one speaks. You need to understand before it's too late." The weight of that statement hung over me like fog. I realized then, the cabin wasn't just a place. It was an invitation, or a warning. Every creak, every scratch, every shadow was a reminder. This was bigger than me, bigger than generosity, and much, much darker than I could have imagined. By the end of part 2, I was fully immersed in a history the town had tried to bury. A cabin that seemed harmless now reeked of secrets, whispers, and danger. And the sense of being watched wasn't going away. It was growing. Who had left those marks? Who watched the cabin now? And what exactly had Mr. Harrow's gift truly delivered into my hands? I didn't know, and that was exactly what made me keep looking.
Have you ever found a book so old, so fragile, that opening it feels like waking a ghost? I did. It was hidden beneath a false floorboard in the cabin's attic. Dust coated everything. The air smelled of decay, of mildew, and something else. Something metallic, sharp, that made my stomach twist. The journals belonged to the Harrow family. handwritten notes, meticulous and obsessive, spanning decades. Their ink had faded, but the words still screamed secrets. The first page alone made my hands shake. We must preserve the game. It cannot leave these walls. Those who know too much, they vanish. Only obedience can maintain order, only silence. The handwriting twisted across the page, almost as if the author were trembling or enraged. Every page revealed contradictions, generosity in public, cruelty in private. The family's philanthropy was only a mask. Behind it, intimidation, bribery, and unthinkable acts no one dared document elsewhere. One entry caught my attention immediately. The child is clever, too clever. He hears too much. He must be guided or removed. Tonight, the cabin will test him. I could feel my pulse quicken. The child, the very same child from the 1970s report, the one everyone claimed disappeared. Other entries mentioned witnesses who had suddenly moved away, neighbors who forgot what they'd seen, and employees who vanished without explanation. And then there were maps, hand-drawn, detailed diagrams of the property, secret rooms, hidden passages, places where sound did not travel. It was a labyrinth, a house, or a prison. I sat on the attic floor, flashlight trembling in my hand, piecing together the story. It became clear that the cabin itself had been designed to contain something dangerous, something the Harrows were desperate to hide. There were sketches of a basement, one that didn't appear in any property record, and a diagram labeled simply, "The Room of Silence." Each page ended with a warning. Do not enter uninvited. Those who do are lost. I felt a chill. The journal wasn't just a diary. It was a manual, a history, a confession. And the more I read, the more I realized this wasn't history being told to me. It was history being handed over as a test. The deeper I delved, the more I understood why no one spoke. The Harrows weren't just wealthy, they were untouchable. The journals mentioned favors, bribes, and threats. Local law enforcement had been subtly, invisibly compromised for decades. Evidence disappeared, witnesses were coerced, families were intimidated into silence. The missing child? Only the tip of the iceberg. One passage detailed a meeting in the town's only cafe. He refuses to comply. Officer H knows what's at stake. Remind him carefully of the Harrow legacy. Subtlety is key. Make it seem voluntary. It must appear that all roads lead to obedience. Even now, as I read these words, I understood why the police had arrived at my cabin. Not random, not coincidental. Every diary entry hinted at the same thing. The Harrows had created a system of fear so ingrained that questioning it could be fatal. And they did not discriminate. Neighbors, employees, children, anyone who dared see beyond the generosity mask. The journals also hinted at rituals, tests for outsiders, and the manipulation of anyone who wandered too close to the truth. I realized that inheriting this cabin was never an accident. It wasn't a gift. It was a challenge, a deliberate drawing of me into their world, testing whether I could see the truth or be consumed by it. Some entries were frighteningly personal. The new inheritor. Observe. Let them step into the cabin. Allow them to linger. Test them. If they fail, they will join the others. Do not intervene. The handwriting was deliberate, cold, calculated. This was no random diary. It was strategy. I wondered how many had failed before me, how many had entered this cabin expecting peace, only to vanish quietly, unrecorded, unremembered. Then one line sent a shiver through my spine.
The room waits. It always waits. And the walls remember. Walls remember. The thought echoed in my mind long after I closed the journal. I could almost hear the cabin breathing around me. The Harrow's power wasn't just influence or money. It was knowledge, control over perception, over truth itself. They had built a legacy of fear, one layer at a time for decades. And now I was standing in its epicenter. The journals also mentioned allies, people in the town who were trusted observers. They were told to guide new visitors, to maintain the illusion of normalcy. I realized some of the locals who seemed overly friendly were complicit. Not malicious, maybe, but trapped in a system too vast to escape. And then the first warning arrived. A note slipped under the cabin door. Small, typed, impersonal. Do not go further. Leave now. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. My hands shook. I was alone, or I thought I was. The cabin seemed to hum as if alive, as if aware of my every move. But I couldn't stop. Every journal, every sketch, every cryptic note pulled me deeper. The missing child, the test rooms, the unspoken rules of the Harrow legacy. Everything pointed to a single fact. The cabin was a trap built by wealth, sustained by fear, and perfected over decades. The police, the townsfolk, the journals themselves, they were all pieces of a puzzle, and I was starting to see the image forming. The Harrows had been watching, always, and now I was part of the story. But the question remained, who else was watching me now, and how long before I became like the others? The journals were clear. Only by understanding the history, by acknowledging the power, could one survive the cabin. But every answer revealed a new question. Every page led to another secret. Every shadow hinted at a presence I could not yet name. The cabin was no longer a house. It was a test of courage, a prison of legacy, and a witness to the darkest corners of human manipulation. And I realized with a shiver I could not shake, the worst was still ahead.
Have you ever felt the walls themselves were whispering? I did. Not metaphorically, literally. Every creak of the cabin, every wind through the broken shutters sounded like a message. After days of reading the Harrow journals, of mapping every hidden passage, I realized something terrifying. The cabin itself was alive with memory. It remembered every footstep, every secret, every betrayal. I decided to leave the attic, to explore the main floor with fresh eyes, a flashlight cutting through the dust. The living room was unchanged, except for the feeling that nothing had been untouched by decades of observation. Furniture aligned with obsessive precision. Even the placement of books on the shelves seemed intentional, almost coded. I found more notes, slipped between floorboards, tucked behind the fireplace mantel. Warnings, instructions, clues about hidden rooms. Do not trust what you see. Trust only the layout. Trust only the doors that move as they should. The house was a maze, and I was learning the rules too late. I reached the hall. Stairs spiraled upward, but I was drawn downward. A basement, or what I had assumed was a basement. The journals had referenced the room of silence, a place where the family tested obedience, loyalty, and fear. I didn't know what awaited me, but the pull was irresistible. The first step into the lower corridor was like entering another world, cool, damp, smelling of earth and mildew. Faint scratches on the walls, as if someone or something had tried to escape. I followed the notes, mapping every turn. The Harrows had engineered traps, not mechanical, not obvious, but psychological. Shadows positioned to mislead, floorboards designed to creak in a specific pattern, lights and darkness orchestrated to induce panic. And then I heard it, a soft shuffle. I froze. The air shifted. I could feel eyes. No one was supposed to be here. I was alone, or so I thought. A whisper floated from the corner. You shouldn't be here. I spun, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Nothing. Just walls, the faint hum of old electricity, the oppressive silence. It was then I realized the journals hadn't mentioned all the dangers. There were presences that didn't need to be written down. Presences that watched, that remembered, that waited. The lower hall ended in a door, thick, heavy, unassuming, but somehow wrong. I could feel a vibration through the floor, a pulse. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but the journals, the missing child, the Harrow family, everything demanded I move forward. I opened the door. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of damp stone. The room beyond was empty, or appeared empty, until I saw the shadows twist in the corner, forming shapes that were almost human. I realized the Harrows hadn't just hidden secrets, they had hidden people, or at least they had hidden what remained of them. Every step I took echoed, every breath seemed amplified, and then a sound I will never forget, a low, slow click, like a lock engaging somewhere behind me. I was trapped. The first warning came in the form of a call. No number, no name, just static and a voice. Leave, now, or you'll be next. The voice wasn't angry. It was calm, cold, certain. I checked my phone. Dead signal. Even though the cabin was supposed to be isolated, I felt as though I was being observed from every angle. The shadows shifted. I wasn't imagining it. Something moved in ways humans shouldn't be able to. I explored further, noticing contradictions everywhere. Hallways that led nowhere, only to loop back. Rooms that appeared larger inside than their walls should allow. Doors that vanished if I looked away. I found remnants of previous visitors, old coats, worn shoes, scraps of paper with warnings scrawled in hasty writing cells. He watches, he waits, obey or vanish. It wasn't just the Harrows. Something deeper, older, enforced the rules of the cabin. Perhaps the Harrows had learned it, or perhaps they had created it. And then the police arrived. Not like before, casual. Flashing lights, the low hum of engines, the crackle of radios. I froze. I wasn't sure whether to run or stay. I didn't even know what they were here for. A knock at the door. Firm, insistent. Open up. This is the Willow Creek Police. Step outside. I hesitated, and that hesitation almost cost me. Through the window, I saw figures move with precision. Not ordinary police. They knew exactly where to stand, exactly how to corner the cabin. I remembered the journal. Obedience is key. Silence is survival. But I wasn't silent, and now I realized that my every move had been anticipated. The Harrows had predicted my arrival. They had predicted my investigation, and now the law itself seemed a weapon. I ducked back into the darkness, trying to make sense of the labyrinth I had stumbled into. A shadow moved across the wall. Closer. The room felt alive, breathing around me. Then I heard it, a child's laugh. Soft, distant, echoing. The missing child, or a memory of them? Was it a warning, an invitation, or a trap? Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but leaving wasn't simple. The cabin wasn't letting me go. And then the final message came, not from a voice, not from a shadow, but from the walls themselves. A whispering, almost imperceptible, brushing against my ears. Some doors, once opened, never close. I understood in that moment that the danger wasn't just the Harrows, it wasn't just the police, it was the cabin and what it contained. I had crossed a threshold, and whatever lay ahead would not allow me to return the way I came. Every sense was heightened, every shadow, every creak, every whisper became a signal, and I realized the only way forward was deeper, into the heart of the cabin, into the truth. But I also realized something else. The truth was watching me, and it did not like being discovered. Have you ever walked back into a place you swore you'd never return to and felt the air itself pulse with warning? I did. The cabin wasn't just a building anymore. It had become a character, a predator, patient, aware. I approached through the dense fog that had settled over the surrounding woods. The headlights of my car barely cut through the gloom. Branches scratched against the windows. The wind carried whispers, or maybe it was the trees groaning under some invisible weight. The police had left, or at least their flashing lights had vanished, but the silence that followed was worse, a silence that demanded attention, a silence that dared me to step closer. Every step on the gravel path felt heavy, deliberate. I could feel the cabin's gaze on me even from a distance. The front door, it looked unchanged, but the scratches on the frame, faint and deliberate, told another story. Someone or something had been waiting. Inside, the smell of damp wood, old paper, and something metallic hit me instantly. The journals I had left behind were gone, not moved, vanished, as if they never existed. I realized that the cabin did not like witnesses. It did not like my curiosity. Every room felt alive. Even the furniture, thick with dust, seemed positioned to guide me or mislead me. Shadows pooled in corners, and I swore some shifted when I blinked. I approached the stairs leading to the attic, the same stairs I had avoided before. I didn't know why I felt compelled to go up, but the pull was irresistible. The attic door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, moonlight filtered through the single dusty window, highlighting particles in the air like they were tiny suspended ghosts. At first glance, the attic looked empty, but the walls were lined with shelves, boxes, jars, files, and dolls. Dolls? They weren't ordinary. Small, fragile, porcelain-faced, with eyes that seemed too lifelike, each one arranged carefully, almost ritualistically, and each one seemed to be staring at me. Then I noticed the writing on the walls, old, faded, in a hand that trembled with purpose. They see, they wait, they remember. I shivered. The egg felt alive. It breathed. It listened. And then I found the hatch, a small square opening in the floor leading downward. The journals had mentioned the room below the floorboards, a place where the Harrows kept their secrets, and perhaps where the darkness truly lived. I descended carefully. The air grew colder with every step. My flashlight illuminated nothing beyond the floor immediately in front of me, but the feeling of being watched intensified. Then I saw it, a door carved directly into the stone foundation, old and heavy, and engraved in faint letters above it, "The truth sleeps here." I knew I was about to cross the final threshold. Everything I had discovered, the warnings, the whispers, the missing journals, led to this door. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but I couldn't. Not now. The door opened with a sound like cracking bones. Inside, the air was thick, oppressive, almost alive. The walls shimmered as if coated with something wet, and the floor, it pulsed. I stepped inside and immediately regretted it. The room was enormous, impossible dimensions. The attic above suggested a small basement, yet the space stretched farther than logic allowed. And there, at the far end, in the center, was a structure. An altar, perhaps, or a cage. I couldn't tell. But the object inside made my blood run cold. It was a human form, or had once been. Shadows contorting over it, stretching and twisting like living darkness. It pulsed, almost breathing. I stumbled back, heart racing.
The journals had warned of this, the room where obedience is tested, where curiosity is punished. A soft sound, like tapping, echoed through the walls. Not human, not animal, something else, something intelligent. I realized the Harrows hadn't just hidden evidence of crimes. They had created an environment designed to manipulate, terrify, and control anyone who dared enter. And now I was inside. The walls began to close in. Not literally, but the psychological weight pressed down. Shadows crept along the floor, then up, then twisting around the ceiling. A voice whispered, barely audible, "You've come too far." I felt the pulse again, the same pulse that had vibrated through the lower hull. And then the shadows began moving toward me. I turned to flee, but the door behind me had vanished. The cabin had sealed itself. Panic surged. I ran deeper into the twisting corridor within the room. Each corner revealed more horrors, artifacts of lives lost, dolls, papers, objects, each a record of fear, each a warning. And then I saw the first photograph, a child, smiling, innocent, missing. It was the same child from the Harrow case files. And then I understood. The missing child hadn't simply disappeared. The child had become part of the cabin, part of its memory, part of its power. I backed up slowly, breathing ragged. The shadows seemed to whisper names, mine, the child's, every visitor who had entered and never left. Then a realization hit me with icy clarity. The Harrows weren't monsters in the traditional sense. The cabin was the monster. The Harrows had learned to harness it, shape it, bend it to their will. Every warning, every journal, every vanished visitor, all were evidence of a single terrifying truth. The cabin remembers, and it punishes. I had entered willingly, seeking answers, but the cabin had its own plans. It wanted me to see, to understand, to feel. And as I stood in that impossible room, I realized what I was seeing was only the beginning. The truth was emerging, but it was incomplete, and the darkness that remained was waiting for me to take the next step.
Have you ever realized too late that curiosity is more dangerous than fear? That the act of seeking answers can make you the answer itself? I learned that night. The room below the attic, the basement, was alive in a way I could not have imagined. Every step I took seemed to echo with history, with footsteps of those long gone. The air was thick, not just with dust, but with memories. Memories that weighed on me like lead. The child's photograph was still in front of me, eyes wide, smiling, frozen in a moment of innocence. But surrounding it were dozens of other images. Children, adults, faces blurred by time, by shadow, by trauma. Each one connected to the cabin, each one erased from the outside world, each one trapped inside its memory. And then I saw the journal. Not the ones I had discovered before, they were gone, but a new one, open on a pedestal. The handwriting was jagged, frantic. The words, they burned themselves into my mind. It remembers everyone who enters. It does not forget. It is the truth. We only survive by feeding it our silence. Feeding it silence. It was not just a cabin. It was a vessel, a collector, a sentient archive of every secret, every crime, every moment of fear and trust betrayed. And the Harrows, they hadn't simply hidden their misdeeds. They had learned to control it. The cabin, its power, its hunger. I tried to step back, but the floor beneath me rippled subtly, impossibly. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with deliberate timing. A low, almost inaudible hum vibrated through my bones. And then I understood. The cabin did not just remember, it judged, and it demanded consequences. Every item in the room, the toys, the journals, the photographs, even the dust, was a record. Each object contained part of a story, a life, a memory, a fear. And the final object, the thing at the center of the room, revealed itself slowly. A small wooden box, unassuming, ordinary. But when I lifted the lid, the air froze. A pulse of cold, like liquid ice, surged through the room. Inside the box, nothing and everything. The child, the truth of the Harrow's deeds, the darkness, the cover-ups, the terror of all those who had come before. It was all there, compressed, waiting for someone to see. And now, I was that someone. I realized that the police, the journals, even the warning lights, they were all part of the cabin's design. Every interaction, every visitor, every whisper of curiosity fed it. Every secret I uncovered was another piece of fuel. And then I heard the voice, not in words, not in sound exactly, but in meaning, in intent. You understand now, but understanding is not enough. The walls shifted, the shadows surged, and I knew the cabin had made its decision. I could leave, but part of me would remain, forever recorded, forever remembered, part of its endless, patient hunger. And the box had chosen what I would take with me, a memory, a warning, a seed of terror that would never leave. I stumbled back, heart pounding, mind racing. Everything I had believed about generosity, trust, and curiosity had been stripped away, and in its place, only questions, endless, unbearable questions. The cabin had shown me the truth, but it had not released me. I emerged hours later, or maybe it was days. Time had a different meaning in that cabin. The forest was silent. The fog had lifted. The police were gone. The neighbor, long dead, long gone, had left only the cabin and its memory. I tried to speak about it, to tell anyone who would listen, but words failed, and I realized that the cabin demanded silence. Even now, I can feel it watching. Every creak in the floorboards, every gust of wind against a window, every faint whisper in the night, it is the cabin, alive, patient, remembering. I learned that generosity can be a trap, that trust can be manipulated, that some gifts are never truly yours. And sometimes the greatest horror is not in what you see, but in what sees you. I cannot return. I cannot destroy it. And I cannot stop the memory from lingering in every corner of my mind. The cabin waits for the next curious soul, the next unwitting visitor. And as I sit here tonight, headphones on, the darkness pressing close, I hear it again, a whisper from the past, from the neighbor, from the cabin itself. Everyone who enters leaves, but everyone also remains. I realize now, fully, finally, the cabin is eternal, and so is its hunger. Even as I tell this story, it watches, and it remembers. And I know, one day, it may come for you too. The silence after the words is deafening. The shadows in the corners of your room are patient, and the memory of the cabin will linger, long after the story ends.